I drove across states with a gift that carried our family's history, only to learn the celebration had happened without me. What they didn't know was that I kept records of every dollar, every sacrifice, every debt. For years, I'd been the safety net they never acknowledged, the ATM they never thanked. But standing on that doorstep in Nashville, clutching my father's wooden box while hearing laughter from inside laughter that should have included me something cold and calculating settled in my chest, they thought family meant I'd always be there to use. They were about to learn that family also meant I remembered everything. This time, the payback would be mine. My name is Madeline Carter, and I should have known better than to believe in second chances. The interstate stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the November darkness. I'd been driving for 8 hours straight from Columbus, Ohio, with 4 more to go before I reached Nashville. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I passed another mile marker, the green sign glowing briefly in my headlights before disappearing into the rearview mirror like everything else I'd left behind. The wooden box sat carefully secured in the passenger seat, wrapped in one of my old sweaters to prevent it from sliding around during the long drive. Dad's box. The one thing he'd specifically mentioned in his will 3 years ago. The one thing he'd wanted to stay in the family. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, were the silver candlesticks that had belonged to my great-grandmother. They'd survived the Depression, 2 wars, and countless family dinners. Now they were supposed to be Ethan's engagement gift. My phone buzzed against the dashboard mount. A text from my assistant at Horizon Designs. Henderson project approval came through. Congrats, enjoy your family time. I smiled, despite the exhaustion pulling at my eyelids. 6 months of late nights and client meetings had finally paid off. The promotion to senior architect was practically guaranteed now, and I'd earned every sleepless hour of it. But tonight wasn't about work. Tonight was about family, about the brother I hadn't seen in over a year, despite living only a day's drive apart. Ethan had called 3 weeks ago, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded me of when we were kids. "Maddie, I'm getting engaged," he'd said, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "I want you to be there. I need you to be there." The sincerity in his voice had caught me off guard. We'd grown apart over the years, different lives, different priorities, different interpretations of what our father's death had meant for our family. But blood was blood, and despite everything, I missed the closeness we'd once shared. I'd immediately requested time off, arranged for project coverage, and started planning the drive. Ethan had insisted it wasn't necessary, that I could just fly down for a weekend visit later, but something in me needed to make this gesture. Maybe it was the approaching holidays, or maybe it was the loneliness that had been creeping in around the edges of my successful but solitary life in Columbus. Whatever it was, I'd packed my bags, loaded Dad's gift into the car, and hit the road at 6 in the morning. The GPS announced another 2 hours to destination as I passed a truck stop glowing with fluorescent light. My back ached from the long drive, and my eyes felt gritty with fatigue, but I pressed on. Ethan was probably already at the restaurant with Sabrina, greeting family members I hadn't seen in years, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about wedding plans. I wondered if anyone had asked about me, if anyone had noticed my absence yet. Rain began to spatter against the windshield, just light enough to blur the road signs but not heavy enough to justify slowing down. The rhythmic swish of the wipers was almost hypnotic, and I found my mind drifting to memories of better times. Ethan and me building snow forts in our backyard, teaching him to drive in Dad's old pickup truck, the way he'd looked at me with such admiration when I'd graduated college, the first in our family to do so. Those memories felt fragile now, like photographs that had been handled too many times. We'd exchanged birthday cards and occasional texts, but the easy intimacy of our childhood had given way to the polite distance of adults with separate lives. Maybe tonight would change that. Maybe this engagement dinner would remind us both of what we'd lost when we stopped being close. The candlesticks in the box beside me seemed to carry the weight of all those hopes. They'd witnessed generations of Carter family celebrations, and now they were traveling through the night toward what I hoped would be a new beginning for Ethan and me. I imagined his face when he opened the box, his surprise at seeing the heirlooms Dad had treasured. Maybe he'd remember the stories Dad used to tell about our great-grandmother, about how she'd hidden these very candlesticks in a root cellar during the war, determined to preserve something beautiful for future generations. By the time I reached the Nashville city limits, it was past 10 in the evening. The downtown skyline glittered against the dark sky, all neon and possibility. My phone directed me through unfamiliar streets toward Ethan's address in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. As I got closer, the houses grew larger, the yards more manicured. Clearly, things had been going well for my little brother. I pulled into the driveway of a 2-story colonial with perfect landscaping and warm light spilling from every window. This was it. After 12 hours on the road, after 3 weeks of anticipation, after years of gradual estrangement, I was finally here. I carefully lifted Dad's box from the passenger seat, locked the car, and walked toward the front door with my heart beating fast and hope blooming in my chest like something that had been dormant too long. The doorbell chimed with an elaborate melody that seemed to echo through the house longer than necessary. I shifted the wooden box to one arm and smoothed down my travel-wrinkled blouse with the other, suddenly aware of how I must look after 12 hours on the road. The sound of approaching footsteps came from inside, along with muffled voices and what sounded distinctly like clinking glasses. The door swung open to reveal a woman I'd only seen in Facebook photos, Sabrina Miller, Ethan's fiancée. She was exactly as beautiful as her pictures suggested, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of effortless elegance that probably took hours to achieve. Her dress was a soft cream color that complemented her complexion, and she wore delicate jewelry that caught the porch light. Everything about her screamed expensive taste and careful curation. "Oh," she said, her smile faltering for just a moment before reassembling itself into something that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Madeline. Hi." "Hi, Sabrina." I lifted the box slightly. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic through Kentucky was absolutely brutal, and then I hit construction outside Louisville that added another hour to the drive. But I made it. I brought something special from Dad's collection for you both." Sabrina's perfectly manicured hand remained on the doorframe, her body positioned in a way that subtly blocked my view into the house. Behind her, I could hear the unmistakable sounds of a gathering laughter, conversation, the soft clink of silverware against plates. My heart lifted. They were still celebrating. I hadn't missed everything after all. "That's so sweet of you," Sabrina said, her voice carrying a strange note I couldn't identify. "But, Madeline, I think there might have been some confusion about the timing." "Confusion." I felt the first cold finger of dread trace down my spine. "What do you mean?" "The engagement dinner," she said slowly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand. "It was yesterday, last night. We tried to keep it small, just immediate family." The words hit me like a physical blow. Yesterday, the celebration I'd driven 12 hours to attend, the reconciliation I'd built up in my mind, the gesture of love and family unity I'd planned, it had already happened, without me. "Yesterday," I repeated, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "But Ethan told me it was tonight. He specifically said Saturday night." "Oh, honey." Sabrina's expression shifted to something that might have been pity if it weren't so patronizing. "We moved it up at the last minute. My parents could only fly in for one night, and with everyone's schedules. You know how it is with family logistics." Behind her, I heard Ethan's unmistakable laugh ring out from what sounded like the dining room. It was followed by a woman's voice I didn't recognize saying something about the most beautiful couple, and then more laughter, warmer and more intimate than the polite chuckles of a formal dinner party. "Is that—" I leaned slightly to try to see past Sabrina's shoulder. "Is Ethan having another party tonight?" Oh, that's just a few close friends stopping by, she said quickly, stepping slightly to block my view more completely. You know, wedding planning stuff. Really boring. You probably wouldn't enjoy it. The casualness of her dismissal was like a slap. I stood there on the perfectly manicured porch, holding my father's most precious gift, while the sounds of my brother's happiness drifted out from behind a door that was clearly not opening for me. I drove 12 hours, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Oh, I know, and that was so sweet of you. Really, Ethan felt terrible about the miscommunication. Her voice carried the practiced sympathy of someone delivering bad news they didn't actually care about. But you know how these things happen. Plans change, family emergencies come up, schedules shift. From inside the house, I heard the distinct sound of a cork being pulled from a wine bottle, followed by cheers and someone it sounded like Ethan making a toast. The words were muffled, but I caught fragments: blessed, family, new beginnings. Family, I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. Exactly, Sabrina said, either missing or choosing to ignore the edge in my voice. And family understands when things don't go according to plan. Right. That's what makes family special. I looked down at the wooden box in my arms, at the careful wrapping I'd done that morning in my Columbus apartment, at the ribbon I'd chosen to match the silver inside. The weight of it seemed to have doubled in the past few minutes. Right, I said softly. Family understands. I'm so glad you get it, Sabrina said, her relief obvious. Ethan was worried you might be upset, but I told him you'd understand. You're so practical, so level-headed. That's what he always says about you. Another burst of laughter from inside. Louder this time. Someone was telling a story, and I could hear Ethan's voice joining in, adding details, the way he used to do when we were kids and he wanted to impress my friends. Well, I said, taking a step backward. I should probably find a hotel then, for the night. Oh, absolutely. There's a lovely Hampton Inn about 10 minutes from here. Very clean. Great reviews. She was already starting to close the door, clearly eager to return to the warmth and laughter inside. Drive safe. Okay, the roads can be tricky at night. Wait, I said, and she paused. Could you tell Ethan I was here, that I brought the candlesticks? Of course, she said, but her tone suggested it was the kind of promise people make when they want to end a conversation. He'll be so touched that you thought of him. The door closed with a soft but definitive click, leaving me standing alone on the porch with my father's gift and the slowly dawning realization that I had been deliberately excluded from my own brother's life. The sounds of celebration continued behind the closed door, muffled now, but still audible, a reminder of everything I wasn't invited to share. I walked back to my car on unsteady legs, carefully placed the wooden box in the passenger seat, and sat in the darkness for a long moment, staring at the warm light spilling from the windows of the house that had no room for me. The Hampton Inn lobby was sterile and bright, a harsh contrast to the intimate warmth I'd been shut out of just 20 minutes earlier. The desk clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, processed my credit card with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd seen countless travelers arrive at odd hours with hollow expressions. Just one night, she asked, not looking up from her computer screen. Yes, I said, though I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Just one night. Room 207 was exactly what I'd expected. Beige walls, generic artwork, and the faint smell of industrial cleaning products mixed with old carpet. I set Dad's wooden box on the small table by the window and stared at it for a long moment. The ribbon I'd chosen so carefully that morning now seemed foolish, like I'd dressed up for a party that was never meant for me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my recent calls until I found Ethan's number. My finger hovered over it for several seconds before I set the phone aside. What would I say? That I'd driven 12 hours based on a conversation that apparently meant nothing to him, that I'd been dismissed at his doorstep like a solicitor. Instead, I opened my laptop and tried to focus on work emails. but the words blurred together. My mind kept drifting back to the sound of laughter behind Sabrina's perfectly positioned body, the way she'd blocked the doorway like a bouncer at an exclusive club. "Just immediate family," she'd said, as if I were some distant cousin instead of the person who'd held Ethan's hand through our father's funeral. The memories came flooding back whether I wanted them or not. I was 7, Ethan was 4, and he'd fallen off his bike in our gravel driveway. Blood streamed from his scraped knees as he wailed, and I'd run to get Band-Aids and antiseptic, carefully cleaning each cut while he sniffled against my shoulder. "Maddie will fix it," he'd said to Dad when our father came running. "Maddie always fixes everything." Fast forward to high school. Ethan was 16 and had crashed Dad's truck into a neighbor's mailbox while joyriding with friends. I was home from college for the weekend and found him sitting in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, head in his hands, terrified to tell Dad what had happened. I'd spent 3 hours with him that night, helping him figure out how to explain, how to make it right, how to face the consequences like a man. When Dad found out the next morning, Ethan had handled it perfectly, and Dad had been proud of his honesty and maturity. Then college applications. Ethan's grades were decent but not spectacular, and he'd struggled with his essay. I'd spent an entire Christmas break helping him revise, draft after draft, until it sang with his voice and his dreams. When the acceptance letter came from Tennessee State, he'd called me first, before even telling Dad. But somewhere along the way, the dynamic had shifted. The little boy who needed his big sister to fix his problems had grown into a man who needed her for other things, practical things that didn't require gratitude or acknowledgement. The first loan request came when he was 25 and starting his landscaping business. "Just $5,000. Maddie, I'll pay you back as soon as I get established." I'd liquidated part of my retirement fund without hesitation. The business had taken off, but the repayment had never materialized. Every time I'd brought it up, there was always another crisis, another urgent need that took priority. Then came the tax problem. Ethan had gotten behind on his business taxes, just a paperwork mix-up, and needed $8,000 to avoid penalties and interest. I'd taken a second mortgage on my condo to help him. Again, the promises of repayment had evaporated into vague mentions of "when things settle down." The credit card had been the most recent development. Ethan's credit was shot from some previous financial mismanagement he'd never fully explained, so he'd asked if he could be an authorized user on one of my cards, just for emergencies. That was 2 years ago. The balance now sat at just over $12,000 charges for home improvements, expensive dinners, what looked like an engagement ring that probably cost more than I made in a month. I'd kept all the documentation in a folder in my filing cabinet at home, telling myself it was just good record keeping. But sitting here in this anonymous hotel room, I realized it was more than that. Somewhere deep down, I'd known this day would come, the day when I'd need proof of exactly how much my little brother had taken from me over the years. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking it might be Ethan with an explanation, an apology, an invitation to come back. Instead, it was from my neighbor in Columbus, asking if I wanted her to water my plants while I was away. I typed back a quick response, then sat staring at the screen. The silence of the hotel room pressed in around me, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning unit and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. Through the thin walls, I could hear a television playing in the next room, some late-night comedy show with a laugh track that seemed to mock my situation. The wooden box sat on the table like an accusation. 3 generations of family history, and I'd driven it across 3 states to give it to someone who couldn't even be bothered to tell me when his engagement dinner was actually happening. Someone who had let his fiancée dismiss me from his doorstep like an unwanted delivery. I thought about the promotion waiting for me back in Columbus, about the life I'd built through careful planning and hard work, about the sacrifices I'd made not just for my career, but for a family that apparently saw me as nothing more than a financial resource to be tapped when convenient and ignored when not. For the first time in my adult life, I wondered what would have happened if I'd been more like Ethan, if I'd learned to take instead of give, to prioritize my own needs instead of everyone else's. Maybe I wouldn't be sitting alone in a hotel room at 11:30 at night, surrounded by the wreckage of my own naive expectations. The anger that had been building since Sabrina opened that door began to crystallize into something harder, more focused. I'd been played for a fool, and not just tonight. This had been going on for years, decades maybe, and I'd been too blind or too willing to see it clearly. But now I could see everything with perfect clarity, and for the first time in my life, I was going to do something about it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat propped against the headboard with my laptop open, scrolling through my online banking and credit card accounts with the methodical precision of an accountant conducting an audit. Every transaction told a story, and collectively, they painted a picture that made my stomach turn. The credit card statement was particularly damning. 2 years of charges that had nothing to do with emergencies, a $700 dinner at some upscale Nashville steakhouse last month, multiple purchases at high-end furniture stores, a $3,000 charge to something called Elegant Events Nashville that I could only assume was related to wedding planning. My little brother was financing his new life with my money, and apparently sleeping just fine at night while doing it. At 4:30 in the morning, I made my first executive decision. I logged into my credit card company's website and removed Ethan as an authorized user. The process took less than 5 minutes, a few clicks, a security verification, and suddenly the financial pipeline I'd been providing was shut off. The sense of power that rushed through me was intoxicating. For years, I'd felt like I was drowning while trying to keep everyone else afloat. Now, for the first time, I was choosing to save myself instead. I called the credit card company's 24-hour customer service line to confirm the change and request that the card be immediately deactivated. The representative, probably accustomed to dealing with fraud cases and domestic disputes at odd hours, processed my request without question. "The card will be declined for any new transactions as of right now," she confirmed. "And, sir, just so you know, you're still responsible for the current balance even though the authorized user has been removed." "I understand," I said, though the $12,000 balance felt like a stone in my chest. That's exactly what I expected. By 6 in the morning, I was showered, dressed, and checked out of the hotel. The drive back to Columbus stretched ahead of me, but this time the journey felt different. I wasn't running away from something, I was moving toward a new version of myself. One who wouldn't be anyone's financial safety net without acknowledgement or respect. My phone started ringing just outside of Louisville. "Maddie." Ethan's voice was tight with panic. "What the hell happened to my credit card? I just tried to buy coffee and it was declined. The guy at the gas station acted like I was some kind of criminal." I pulled into a rest stop parking lot before answering. Cars and trucks moved past on the interstate, everyone heading somewhere with purpose. I envied them their simple destinations. "Good morning to you too, Ethan," I said, keeping my voice level. "How was your engagement dinner last night?" "Oh wait, that was Thursday, wasn't it? Sorry, I get confused about events I'm not invited to." "Maddie, come on. Sabrina told me you stopped by. Look, I'm sorry about the mix-up with the dates, but..." It wasn't a mix-up. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't soften them. "You told me Saturday night. I have the text message. I drove 12 hours to be there for you, and your fiancé dismissed me from your doorstep like I was selling magazine subscriptions." "That's not okay. Maybe there was some miscommunication, but we can talk about that later. Right now, I need to know what happened to the card. I've got contractors coming to the house today, and I need to pay them." The audacity of it took my breath away. No apology. No acknowledgement of how he'd treated me. Just straight to demanding access to my money so he could pay for his perfect new life with his perfect new wife. "The card was never yours, Ethan." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like. The card is in my name, tied to my credit, paid with my money. You were an authorized user, which was a privilege I extended to you for emergencies. Apparently, your definition of emergency includes furniture shopping and wedding planning. Maddie, you're being ridiculous. We had an agreement. No, I interrupted. We had an arrangement where you asked for help and I gave it, over and over again, for years. And in return, I got excluded from your engagement dinner and treated like an inconvenience when I showed up to celebrate with you. That arrangement is over. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, probably trying to figure out how to manipulate me back into compliance. It was a sound I remembered from childhood, Ethan calculating his next move when he'd been caught doing something wrong. Look, I'm sorry about last night. Okay. Really sorry. Sabrina was stressed about her parents being there, and the whole thing got complicated. But you can't just cut me off like this. I've got obligations. Maddie, the contractors, the wedding deposits, Your obligations, I said slowly, are not my problem. What's gotten into you? This isn't like you at all. And that was the moment I realized he was absolutely right. This wasn't like me at all. The old me would have been apologizing by now, offering to reinstate the card, asking what I could do to help fix whatever crisis he'd created. The old me would have swallowed the hurt and humiliation because keeping peace in the family was always more important than standing up for myself. But the old me had died somewhere between Nashville and Louisville, in the space between immediate family and a hotel room where I'd calculated exactly how much my love had cost me over the years. You're right, I said. This isn't like me. The old me would have apologized for inconveniencing you by driving 12 hours to attend a party I wasn't actually invited to. The old me would have reinstated your card and probably offered to cover the contractors too. But the old me was an idiot who confused being useful with being loved. Maddie. I'm done. Ethan, find another way to pay for your life. I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. The finality of it was both terrifying and liberating, like cutting a rope while falling and discovering you could fly. My phone buzzed with text messages over the next hour, first from Ethan, then from Sabrina, then from an unknown number that was probably Ethan using someone else's phone. I deleted them all without reading them. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself over my family's expectations. The feeling was so foreign I wasn't sure if I was having a breakdown or a breakthrough, maybe both. What I did know was that the woman who had driven to Nashville full of hope and family heirlooms was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, clearer, and infinitely less willing to be taken for granted. The road stretched ahead toward Columbus, toward my real life, toward a future where I would never again mistake being needed for being valued. Back in Columbus, my condo felt different, cleaner somehow, like I'd purged more than just Ethan's access to my credit card. I spent Sunday morning organizing the filing cabinet in my home office, pulling out every document related to my brother's financial history. What I found was worse than I'd remembered. The paper trail went back nearly a decade. Loan agreements written on napkins and scraps of paper, promising repayment as soon as the business picks up. Bank transfer receipts for emergency after emergency that never seemed to end. Screenshots of text messages where Ethan promised to make it right and pay you back with interest. Even a few emails where he detailed elaborate repayment plans that had never materialized. I spread everything across my dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. $23,417. That was the total, not counting interest or the opportunity cost of what that money could have earned if I'd invested it instead of pouring it into the black hole of my brother's financial irresponsibility. The most damning piece was a handwritten IOU from 3 years ago, signed by Ethan and witnessed by our father just weeks before Dad's heart attack. $8,000 to cover business taxes, with a promise to repay within 6 months. Dad's shaky signature at the bottom made my chest tighten. He'd been sick already, though none of us had known how sick, and he'd still taken the time to witness his son's promise to his daughter. A promise that had never been kept. Monday morning, I walked into Horizon Designs with a new sense of purpose. My colleagues noticed the change immediately. Several people commented that I seemed different, more focused. If they only knew that my focus had shifted from being the family doormat to becoming the family debt collector. During my lunch break, I called Marcus Rodriguez, a lawyer who'd worked with our firm on several commercial projects. Marcus specialized in contract disputes and civil litigation, and more importantly, he owed me a favor after I'd helped design his new law office at a significant discount. "Madeline, good to hear from you," Marcus said when his secretary put me through. "How's the Henderson project coming along?" "Actually, I'm calling about a personal matter," I said, settling into the conference room I'd booked for privacy. "I need advice about collecting on some personal loans." "Family stuff." His tone shifted to the careful neutrality lawyers used when personal relationships intersected with legal matters. "My brother. I've been lending him money for years, substantial amounts, and he's made no effort to repay any of it. I have documentation going back almost 10 years. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "How substantial are we talking?" "Over $23,000, not counting the credit card debt he's racked up." A low whistle. "That's definitely worth pursuing. Do you have written agreements?" "Some of them. Others are documented through bank transfers, text messages, emails where he acknowledges the debt. One IOU is even witnessed by our father." "That's good. Real good. Actually, the witnessed IOU alone gives us a strong foundation. When was the last time he acknowledged owing you money?" I scrolled through my phone. 2 months ago. He texted me asking for an extension on what he called everything I owe you because the wedding expenses were killing him financially. Perfect. That resets the statute of limitations clock. Listen, why don't you come in tomorrow afternoon? Bring everything you have, and we'll see what kind of case we can build. After hanging up, I sat in the empty conference room feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of taking action instead of just enduring. For too long, I'd been reactive, responding to Ethan's crises and demands. Now I was being proactive, and it felt incredible. That evening, I did something I'd never done before I hired a private investigator. I'd found Rebecca Martinez through an online search, and her reviews suggested she specialized in financial investigations and asset discovery. If I was going to sue Ethan for the money he owed me, I needed to know exactly what he was worth and whether he could actually pay. "I need a comprehensive financial profile," I told Rebecca during our phone consultation. "Bank accounts, property values, business assets, everything. He's getting married in a few months, so I suspect there might be some creative accounting happening to hide assets before the wedding." "That's more common than you'd think," Rebecca said. "People getting divorced do it all the time. But I've seen it with family disputes too. How quickly do you need this information?" "As soon as possible. I want to file suit before he has a chance to transfer everything to his fiancée or her family." "Give me a week. I'll have a full report for you by next Friday." While Rebecca worked on the financial investigation, I spent my evenings digging deeper into Ethan's online presence. Social media was a goldmine of evidence about his lifestyle and spending habits. Instagram photos of expensive dinners, Facebook check-ins at luxury hotels, LinkedIn updates about expanding his landscaping business to include high-end commercial properties. The most infuriating discovery was Sabrina's Pinterest board titled Dream Wedding, which featured a reception venue that I knew from my architectural work cost at least $50,000 to rent. The catering alone would probably run another $30,000. My brother was planning a wedding that cost more than most people's annual salary, and he was doing it while owing me enough money to buy a decent car. I screenshot everything, organized it by date, and added it to my growing file of evidence. If Ethan thought he could live like a millionaire while treating me like his personal bank, he was about to learn a very expensive lesson about consequences. The breakthrough came on Thursday when Rebecca called with preliminary findings. "Your brother's been busy," she said without preamble. "He's got assets worth close to $200,000, but here's the interesting part. Most of it's been acquired in the last 18 months, right around the time he got engaged." "What kind of assets?" "The house is worth about $160,000, with a mortgage of $90,000. His business has equipment and contracts worth maybe $40,000. But get this, he also has a joint savings account with the fiancé that currently has $18,000 in it. My hand tightened on the phone. $18,000 just sitting in savings while he owes me over $23,000? Gets better. I found records of a business loan he took out last year for $35,000 to expand his equipment fleet, based on his tax returns, which I managed to access through some creative channels. His business is actually quite profitable. He's been crying poor to you while making good money. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. It was one thing to be irresponsible with money, another thing entirely to deliberately deceive family while building wealth. Rebecca, I need you to document everything, every asset, every account, every source of income. I want a report so thorough that my lawyer can use it to garnish his wages if necessary. You got it. But Madeline, you should move fast. I noticed some unusual activity in his accounts over the past month, large transfers that might indicate he's trying to move money around. If he suspects you're coming after him legally, he might try to hide assets. After hanging up, I sat in my living room staring at Dad's wooden box, which I'd placed on my mantel next to a photo of our family from better times. Ethan couldn't have been more than 12 in the picture, grinning at the camera with a missing front tooth, his arm around my waist like I was his hero. That little boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw his sister as nothing more than a financial resource to be exploited. But if he wanted to play games with money, I was about to show him that two could play, and I played to win. The lawsuit hit Ethan like a freight train on a Tuesday morning in December. Marcus had filed the papers the previous Friday, and by law, Ethan had to be served within 72 hours. I knew the exact moment it happened because my phone started ringing at 9:15 in the morning, first Ethan's number, which I'd unblocked specifically to savor this moment, then Sabrina's, then numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. Marcus called me at 10:30 with barely contained glee in his voice. The process server said your brother went white as a sheet when he read the summons. Apparently, he tried to argue that it was some kind of mistake, that family doesn't sue family. What did the server tell him? That he had 30 days to respond or face a default judgment. Also handed him the asset freeze order we got from Judge Patterson. As of this morning, he can't touch any of his major accounts without court approval. The asset freeze had been Marcus's brilliant suggestion. Given Rebecca's evidence that Ethan had been moving money around, we'd convinced the judge that there was a substantial risk of him hiding assets before trial. Now his business accounts, savings, and even his ability to sell the house were locked down pending resolution of the case. I spent my lunch break reading the voicemails Ethan had left. The progression was fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Anger, denial, bargaining, and what sounded suspiciously like the beginning of panic. Message 1, 9:16 a.m. Maddie, what the hell is this? You can't be serious. Call me back right now. Message 2, 9:23 a.m. This is insane. You're suing your own brother over what? Some old loans. Family helps family. Maddie, this isn't how we solve problems. Message 3, 9:47 a.m. Look, I know you're upset about the engagement dinner, but this is completely out of proportion. We can work this out. Just call off your lawyer and we'll talk. Message 4, 10:52 a.m. The bank won't let me access my business account. Do you understand what you've done? I have payroll on Friday. I have contractors waiting for payment. You're destroying my business over nothing. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, the messages had taken on a different tone entirely. Message 8, 3:15 p.m. Maddie, please, I'm begging you. Sabrina's parents are flying in this weekend to finalize wedding plans, and now I can't even pay the caterer. They're going to think I'm some kind of fraud. Please, just call me back. The satisfaction I felt listening to his desperation should have worried me, but instead it felt like vindication. For years, I'd been the one scrambling to solve his problems, stressed about his crises, worried about his future. Now he was getting a taste of what it felt like to be powerless, to have someone else control your financial destiny. Rebecca called that evening with an update that made everything even sweeter. Your brother's been busy today, she said. He tried to transfer $15,000 from the joint account with his fiancée to a new account he opened this morning. Bank blocked it because of the asset freeze. Then he called 3 different lawyers before finding one willing to take his case. Who'd he hire? Some guy named Thompson who advertises on bus benches. Not exactly top-tier representation. But here's the interesting part I heard from my contact at the courthouse, that Thompson's already trying to negotiate a settlement. Your brother wants to talk. It's been less than 12 hours. Apparently, that's all it took for reality to set in. The asset freeze means he can't pay his contractors, can't meet payroll, can't even write a check for wedding expenses without court approval. He's hemorrhaging money and credibility by the hour. That night, Marcus called with Thompson's settlement offer. He's willing to acknowledge the debt and set up a payment plan, $500 a month for the next 4 years. I did the math quickly. That's only $24,000, and it doesn't include interest or legal fees. Exactly what I told him. I countered with full payment of $31,000, the principal plus interest calculated at market rates within 90 days. Or we proceed to trial. What did he say? That he needs to talk to his client. But, Madeline, I think you should know Thompson also hinted that your brother might try to claim the loans were gifts, not loans. He's going to argue that you never expected repayment because you're family. The audacity of it made me laugh out loud. We have written IOUs, Marcus. We have text messages where he acknowledges the debt and promises repayment. We have bank records showing these were loans, not gifts. I know, and so does Thompson, which is why he's trying to settle. But if this goes to trial, expect them to play the family card hard. They'll try to make you look like the heartless sister destroying her brother's life over money. Let them try. I have 10 years of documentation showing exactly who's been destroying whose life. The next morning brought a surprise visitor to my office. Janet from reception called to tell me that a woman named Sabrina was in the lobby asking to see me. I almost told Janet to send her away, but curiosity won out. Sabrina looked different than she had at Ethan's front door, smaller somehow, less polished. Her perfect composure had been replaced by the kind of barely controlled desperation I recognized from my own mirror after years of dealing with Ethan's crises. Madeline, thank you for seeing me, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I know things have been complicated between us. That's one way to put it. She clasped her hands in her lap, and I noticed her engagement ring a massive stone that probably cost more than my car. I need you to understand that Ethan never meant to hurt you. He talks about you all the time, about how proud he is of your success, how much he looks up to you. Funny way of showing it? The engagement dinner was my fault, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. My parents could only come in for one night, and I panicked about the timing. I convinced Ethan to move it up, and then I was so stressed about everything being perfect that I handled your arrival badly. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. And the part where you told me it was just immediate family. Her cheeks flushed. I was protecting the evening. You have to understand, wedding planning is incredibly stressful, and Ethan's been under so much pressure with the business expansion and trying to provide the kind of life I deserve. The last thing we needed was family drama. Family drama, I repeated slowly, like his sister showing up to celebrate his engagement. That's not what I meant, but her tone suggested it was exactly what she meant. Sabrina, why are you really here? She took a shaky breath. The lawsuit is destroying everything we've worked for. Ethan can't pay his employees, can't meet his contracts, can't even access the money for our wedding deposits. Our vendors are threatening to cancel. My parents are asking questions about his financial stability, and the stress is making him sick. And you want me to make it all go away? I want you to remember that family is more important than money. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Whatever Ethan owes you, we'll pay it back. But this legal action is humiliating him, destroying his reputation in the community. Is your pride really worth ruining his life? The question hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She genuinely seemed to believe that I was the villain in this story. that my decision to collect on legitimate debts was somehow a betrayal of family values. Then I remembered the sound of laughter behind her as she dismissed me from Ethan's doorstep, and the sympathy evaporated. "Sabrina," I said quietly, "my pride isn't what's ruining Ethan's life. His choices are, and now he gets to live with the consequences." She left my office with tears streaming down her face, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction watching her go. Ethan showed up at my condo on a frigid Thursday evening in January, 3 weeks before our court date. I saw him through the peephole-hunched shoulders, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, the kind of defeated posture I'd never seen on him before. He looked like he'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him seem older than his 29 years. I let him stand there for a full minute before opening the door. "Hello, Ethan." "Maddie." His voice was hoarse, like he'd been shouting or maybe just not sleeping. "Can I come in, please?" I stepped aside without a word, and he walked into my living room like a man entering his own execution. His eyes immediately went to Dad's wooden box on the mantel, then to the dining room table where I'd left some of the loan documents, visible a deliberate choice on my part. "Coffee," I offered with the same tone I'd use for a stranger. "No, thanks." He sat heavily on my couch, the same couch where he'd sprawled countless times as a teenager, eating my food and complaining about his problems while I helped him with homework or covered for him with Dad. Now he perched on the edge like he wasn't sure he belonged there. We sat in silence for nearly 5 minutes. I wasn't going to make this easy for him by starting the conversation. If he wanted something from me, and he obviously did, he could damn well ask for it directly. Finally, he cleared his throat. "The wedding's off." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Sabrina's parents pulled out when they couldn't get straight answers about my financial situation. They hired their own lawyer to look into the asset freeze, and when they found out about the lawsuit, he ran a hand through his unwashed hair. They convinced her I was hiding debts, that I'd been lying about my stability. She gave me back the ring on Tuesday. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. Whatever else Sabrina was, she'd seemed to genuinely care about him. "Are you—" His head snapped up, and for a moment I saw a flash of the old Ethan, quick to anger, quick to blame everyone else for his problems. "Because this is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? You couldn't stand seeing me happy, so you decided to destroy everything I'd built." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to explain that I'd never intended for his relationship to end, that I'd only wanted what was rightfully mine. But a larger part of me was curious to see how far he'd push this narrative. "Go on," I said calmly. "You always resented that I was Dad's favorite," he continued, warming to his theme. "That he trusted me with the business ideas, that he saw potential in me. You couldn't handle that someone else in the family might actually succeed." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. "Dad's favorite." Yeah, he believed in me, supported my dreams, wanted to see me build something lasting, and you couldn't stand it. I stood up and walked to my filing cabinet, pulled out a manila folder, and returned to my seat. Ethan watched me with growing unease as I opened it and began laying papers on the coffee table between us. "This is the IOU you signed 3 years ago," I said, placing the document where he could see Dad's shaky signature. $8,000 for business taxes, witnessed by our father 6 weeks before he died. Ethan glanced at the paper but didn't pick it up. "This," I continued, laying down a bank statement, "shows the transfer I made to your account that same day. And this, another document, is the tax lien that was filed against your business when you failed to pay even with my money. I had to give you another $4,000 to clear it." "Maddie." "I'm not finished." I pulled out my phone and began reading from the screen. Text message from you, dated March 15th of last year. "Maddie, I know I've been terrible about paying you back. I promise as soon as the wedding is over and things settle down. I'll make this right. You've been more than patient, and I don't deserve a sister like you." His face had gone pale. Another one, from October. Can you cover the deposit for the reception venue? I'm short about $3,000. And if we don't pay by Friday, we lose the date. I'll add it to what I owe you and pay everything back in January when the business loan comes through. I set the phone down and leaned forward. Tell me again about how Dad favored you. Ethan, tell me about how much he believed in your business acumen while I was writing check after check to keep you from losing everything. That's not... I never asked you to... Yeah, you never asked. My voice rose for the first time since he'd arrived. You never asked me to cover your taxes, to co-sign your credit applications, to let you use my card for emergencies that turned into furniture shopping and wedding planning. I pulled out the most damning piece of evidence, a printout of his credit card statements going back 2 years. Biltmore Estate Tours, $600. Del Frisco Steakhouse, $750. Tiffany and Company, $4,000 for what I can only assume was Sabrina's engagement ring. Some emergency, Ethan. He stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. I was going to pay you back. All of it. The business is profitable now, and once the wedding was over... The business that Rebecca Martinez's investigation shows has been profitable for 3 years. I pulled out another folder. The same business that's currently holding contracts worth over $60,000. The business whose owner has $18,000 sitting in a joint savings account while claiming he can't afford to repay his sister? Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time in our lives, he had no excuse, no explanation, no way to twist the facts to make himself the victim. Yeah, you want to know what Dad really thought about your business sense? I stood up and walked to the mantel, picking up the wooden box. He left me this. Not you me. He left me the family heirlooms because he knew I was the one who could be trusted to preserve what mattered. I opened the box, revealing the silver candlesticks I'd driven 12 hours to give him. These were supposed to be your engagement gift. I was going to drive all that way to hand over a piece of our family history because I hoped that maybe we could be close again. Ethan's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the candlesticks. Maddie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about the dinner, about Sabrina, about all of it. I never meant for things to get this far. But they did get this far, and now we're 3 weeks away from a trial where I'm going to present all of this evidence to a judge who doesn't care about family feelings. Only facts. And the facts, Ethan, are very simple. You owe me $31,000, and you have the assets to pay it. He was crying openly now, something I hadn't seen since we were children. Please, Maddie, I'll lose everything. The house, the business, my reputation in the community. I'll have to start over with nothing. I looked at my little brother, this man who had taken my love and twisted it into obligation, who had mistaken my loyalty for weakness, who had erased me from his life the moment it became convenient and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. You should have thought of that before you decided I didn't matter enough to invite to your engagement dinner, I said quietly. Family doesn't mean I'm your victim. Ethan, you erased me first, now I'm erasing you. He left my condo that night a broken man, and I slept better than I had in years. The courthouse smelled like old wood and broken dreams. I sat in the gallery behind Marcus, watching as Judge Patterson reviewed the settlement agreement one final time. 3 weeks of legal maneuvering had led to this moment. Ethan had finally agreed to pay the full amount rather than face a public trial that would have destroyed what remained of his reputation. Ethan sat at the defendant's table with his bargain basement lawyer, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years and 2 months. His business had survived. Barely. But the asset freeze had cost him several major contracts and most of his employees. The house, the beautiful colonial where Sabrina had dismissed me from the doorstep, would be sold within 60 days to satisfy the judgment. Mr. Carter, Judge Patterson addressed my brother directly. Do you understand that this settlement requires full payment of $31,000 within 90 days, plus an additional $5,000 in legal fees and court costs? Yes, Your Honor. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. And you understand that failure to meet these payment terms will result in wage garnishment and seizure of remaining assets? Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Carter. The judge turned to me. Are you satisfied with these terms? I stood, feeling the weight of every document, every sleepless night, every year of being taken for granted. Yes, Your Honor, completely satisfied. Judge Patterson signed the order with a flourish that seemed to echo through the courtroom. This matter is resolved. Court dismissed. I walked out of that courthouse into a February afternoon so bright it hurt my eyes. The snow had melted overnight, leaving the streets wet and gleaming like everything had been washed clean. Marcus shook my hand on the courthouse steps, congratulating me on what he called the most thorough financial reckoning he'd seen in family court. I didn't look back to see if Ethan followed us out. That part of my life was over. The money started arriving in my account the following week, electronic transfers that showed up with the sterile efficiency of any other business transaction. $36,000 total. Every penny accounted for. I paid Marcus his fees, set aside money for taxes, and deposited the rest into my retirement account where it would grow into something meaningful instead of disappearing into someone else's irresponsibility. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a real estate agent informing me that Ethan's house was officially on the market. The asking price was $160,000, exactly what Rebecca's investigation had estimated. I drove past it once, just to see the for sale sign in the yard where Sabrina's perfect landscaping was already showing signs of neglect. I felt nothing looking at it. No satisfaction, no regret. Just the mild interest of someone observing the consequences of choices that were no longer my problem. Spring came early that year. I used part of my settlement money to take a vacation to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do but had never been able to afford because there was always some crisis requiring my financial intervention. I spent 2 weeks wandering through museums and eating incredible food and sleeping in hotel rooms where no one could call me asking for money. On my last night in Rome, sitting at a sidewalk cafe with a glass of wine and a perfect view of the Pantheon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Maddie, it's Ethan. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I'm getting help. Financial counseling, therapy, the works. I finally understand what I did to you, to us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I'm learning to be better. I hope you're happy. I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Whether Ethan learned to be better was no longer my concern. I'd spent enough years trying to save him from himself. Now I was focused on building a life where my love and generosity would be valued instead of exploited. The candlesticks still sit on my mantel, next to a photo from my Italian vacation. Sometimes I think about giving them to a museum or selling them to a collector who would appreciate their history. But for now, they serve as a reminder of the woman I used to be, the one who confused being needed with being loved, who mistook sacrifice for virtue. That woman died in a hotel room in Nashville, and in her place rose someone stronger, someone who understood that the most important relationship you can have is the one with yourself. Someone who knew that family wasn't a license to take advantage, and that love without respect was just exploitation with better marketing. As I settled back into my life in Columbus, promoted to senior architect and finally earning what I was worth, I realized that the best revenge hadn't been the lawsuit or the money, or even watching Ethan lose everything he'd built on my generosity. The best revenge was simply choosing myself, finally and completely, for the first time in my adult life. 6 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ethan had moved back in with our mother, working for someone else's landscaping company while he rebuilt his credit and his life. Part of me, a very small part, hoped he would actually learn from this experience, that he would become the man I'd always believed he could be. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all, and that, more than anything, felt like freedom. The rain started as I finished writing these words, drumming against my windows like applause for a performance finally ended. I closed my laptop and made myself a cup of tea, settling into the life I'd built for myself, a life where my bank account was my own, where my generosity was a gift rather than an expectation, where the only person whose financial crises I solved were my own. It was, I realized, exactly the life I deserved. Thank you for listening to my story of reclaiming my power and choosing myself over toxic family expectations. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story? Are you dealing with similar family dynamics, or have you had your own moment of standing up for yourself? Please subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's connect with others who understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries that actually stick.